Welcome back to Following Noadon, a Stormlight podcast. This is the podcast where I pretend to not know anything about the future of Stormlight and I try to keep my mouth shut while Paul and Eliot are
trying to weasel it out of you.
Try to wade their way through Words of Radiance at the moment. And I try to not talk about anything I just learned in Rhythm of War, which I just read. So we'll see how this.
You're gonna have your hands full.
We'll see how this episode goes. Yeah. This week we're doing chapters 17 through 21. This is episode 29. Elliot, how are you feeling?
Feeling pretty good. Doing my level best to stay away from Rhythm of War spoilers as much as I possibly can. Shout out to all you guys out there just reading Rhythm of War. I'm excited for all you guys. By my calculations, I'll catch up to you guys in about 13 months.
Give or take. Paul, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling real good. Looking forward to these chapters. I enjoyed reading them. I'm also looking forward to eventually getting to Rhythm of War. I also have been avoiding Twitter and things like that for the most part. Because if something got spoiled now for the book that just came out, I'd be kind of heartbroken. I'll be honest. I'd be very heartbroken, actually. So
yeah, totally understandable. I just want to get a prediction down here real quick. You guys know that The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance are both in-world books in the Stormlight Archive. What do you guys think Rhythm of War is? I just want to hear your thoughts, because I'm sure you guys have thought about this at least a little bit, right? Because you've heard the titles, you know what the titles are so far. What do you think Rhythm of War is?
We had this discussion briefly before, I think. We talked about Oathbringer was the first mention of that, because it's Dalinar's sword. My guess was that it's literally pertaining to the Rhythm of War, there's a full-on war going at the time, and maybe it has to do with the Parshendi and their rhythmic lives.
If you'd asked before we read the recent interludes that we did, where we got to see a bit of point of view from the Parshendi, I would have had no idea. I probably would have guessed it was some epic poetry from some in-world author or something like that, a book or a collection of works maybe. But now that we've seen the Parshendi and we know that they have a bunch of different rhythms, like the rhythm of peace and the rhythm of reprimand and all those other ones, Rhythm of War seems to fit right into that. So it also doesn't seem to be too much of a stretch that the Rhythm of War might be written down somewhere, and so perhaps it is a in-universe book or sheet music, if you will, perhaps.
Gotcha.
At your local music store.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things that's going on Twitter right now with a lot of people is we're trying to figure out what the fifth book is going to be called, because we know the acronym, because it's all, the whole thing is a Ketic.
WT.
Yeah, the whole thing is Ketic, so it's KOWT. So we're all trying to figure out what the title of the last book's going to be. We're having a lot of fun with that. But we're not there yet, so we can talk about chapters 17 through 21 of Words of Radiance. And Paul, do you have 2 words for these chapters?
I do. So my 2 words for the chapters we're going over are broken and courageous.
Okay. Broken and courageous. Elliot, do you have 2 words to summarize these chapters?
I do. I have charisma and deception.
Okay. Charisma, deception, broken, and courageous. All right, let's discuss these words. talk to me about broken and courageous Paul.
So broken is mostly referring to, we have a flashback Shallan chapter.
We do?
More, it's not very long, but more of a complete chapter, it feels like, than, I believe it was chapter 10 was the first time we had that. And we kind of see how Shallan, after the events that we had read up before, was kind of mentally broken. And she can't hardly like hold it together, almost like she has a real hard time. And so that was mostly the reason why I chose that. My other word, courageous, was mostly referring to Shallan in the present day, as she really steps out of her comfort zone and talks to a bunch of bandits and deserters and such,
Right.
to persuade them. So took a great deal of courage.
Gotcha. Elliot, you want to explain your words a bit?
Yeah, I do. And they're actually paired together despite being perhaps maybe a bit opposite. I had charisma and deception, and throughout these chapters, at least the Shallan ones, I'm kind of skipping over the Kaladin one for now. I can't really tie this into the Kaladin one here. But as far as Shallan's story, Shallan's really starting to exercise her skills in persuasion. I think we've talked about persuasion over the last couple of episodes that we've had. And ultimately, in this episode, in these chapters, we get to see her really start to exert either an impressive amount of charisma or, depending on how you look at it, an impressive amount of deception. And I honestly can't tell which it is at this point. Is she honestly inspiring these people that she's changing, or is she really deceiving them and manipulating them just because they're weak-minded and she can get them to do what she wants them to? So we'll talk about this more as we go through it, but it's an interesting question for me right now about Shallan.
Gotcha. Before we get too far, and we'll talk about Shallan kind of all at once here a little bit, but let's talk about Kaladin first. And with this Kaladin chapter, chapter 18, comes a spell check. And it's not a hard spell check, but they say it differently than how I would imagine them saying it in the audiobook. So I think Paul is going to get this one wrong. And I think Elliot's going to incorrectly pronounce it if the audiobook is correct. So this will be interesting. Eliot, what is the name of Renarin's swordmaster?
Way to have a lot of faith in us there, Trevor.
It's weird.
Man.
It's weird,
Yeah,
and I'll
come
explain
on.
it. I'll explain it once you guys reveal to each other how you're pronouncing this.
So I'm actually going to throw out two pronunciations of this word because there's the way I want it to be pronounced, and there's the way I think it is pronounced.
Okay.
So the way I wish it would be pronounced is Zale.
Okay.
Zale, which is kind of funky given how it's spelled, but I think that would be cool. How I actually think it's pronounced is Zahel.
Okay. Paul, do you remember how they say it in the audiobook?
I'm not 100%. I want to say it is close to Zahel. I honestly don't remember like 100% though.
So in the audiobook, they say Zyle, and they just full on go Zyle.
Yeah.
And all right, how do they spell this, Paul?
So for Zyle, I had Zahel.
Wow. Okay, that is
Wow.
correct. So when
Bingo.
I first read this book, I listened to it like you're doing, Paul. And when I went back to read it, I
Sounds
thought this
like
was
Kyle with a Z.
I thought this was two different characters because there's no I and there's no E for anything to give it the Zai part of that first syllable. So it's Zahel and they say Zyle. But a lot of people say Zael. Like they
Like Zahel.
yeah, Zael, like almost two words.
Like the first
Okay.
Zahel.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
Elliot, I do want to go back to what you wanted it pronounced as. What can you say that again for me?
I think it'd be cool if you just kind of ignored the H in the middle completely and just said Zale.
I
Gotcha.
kind of dig it.
Yeah.
I think Xyle is cool. Like I like
That
both
is cool,
of those.
actually.
I always think like my first thought was like Kyle with a Z, but like there's no way that
Right.
that it would be spelled like that. But
Yeah. They pronounce him Xyle in the audiobook. So
But he seems like a cool dude. It's appropriate that he has a cool name.
he does have a cool name.
he is
What
cool.
What were you guys' thoughts on this chapter? Because I really actually enjoyed chapter 18 a lot, because the whole scene here is really funny to me. It's Renarin running up and down these stairs, jumping off the top of the building and just like smashing his head on the sand over and over. And Kaladin and Xyle are trying to have like a serious conversation. And I can just imagine Renarin just like wee poof, like in the background the whole time.
I really liked this. For one, it's really the first time we've gotten to see stuff with Renarin for the most part. I mean, we've heard a little bit of dialogue, and he's kind of been there, and it's still nothing like amazing. He's just running and jumping off a like cliff,
Right.
But it was really funny, and like noted, Renarin, he doesn't have like the like natural brawn or skill of like a warrior or anything like that. He's not the best swordsman like Adolin, his brother, but he kind of has like the integrity and like the fighting spirit, I guess, or the willing spirit, if you will. And I think that's a really really cool trait. So I actually really like Renarin, and I thought it was cool. We got to see some of him.
I totally agree. This I think was the first time we get to learn about like who Renarin is. We've seen him before. We've seen him a bunch of times. Really, I couldn't tell you what kind of a person Renarin is based on what we've seen before. Now we get to see this, as you said, Trevor, kind of comical scene where he's repeatedly just diving off the roof of this place and smacking his head on the ground, which is fine because he's in shard plate apparently. Right. But I thought this was good and rather humorous too with Renarin there. And I do like that about Renarin. I like that he's teachable. He learn and he's willing to just jump in and do it, even though he's maybe not quite the natural warrior that maybe someone like Adolin or Dalinar is.
Right. Something I want to highlight here is Kaladin and Renarin are actually the same age. They are both either 19 or 20 at this point. I believe they're 20. And it's pretty easy to forget that because I always imagine Renarin is younger than that. Younger than Kaladin, younger than Adolin for sure. But the maturity level here of Kaladin is way higher than Renarin. Or at least the experience of battle, that type of thing. So say that again. Kaladin and Renarin are the same age?
Correct. Okay. Gotcha. And then Adolin's a little like 2 or 3 years older than that.
Yeah, I believe Adolin is 23 at this time, and Kaladin and Renarin are 20.
Got it. That's helpful.
I did not realize that. I always envisioned Renarin as like 14 or 15. Like about 15 or so.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem here is by now Renarin is certainly supposed to know how to fight, and he hasn't ever been trained because he has a blood weakness and he keeps freezing in battle. So he's just starting now, and he's supposed to know all this stuff already.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Xyle for a second here.
Okay.
It's going to be hard for me to say that name now and get the other pronunciations out of my head.
Right.
Xyle.
Okay. Pretend that H is an I, and you'll be good.
Yeah, that definitely does it. Okay. So Xyle, he's an interesting character for me. He's a very interesting character, and he's a type of character I didn't realize existed, and that's a warrior ardent. I didn't realize that was like a thing. I thought that ardents were just your scholar types or your monks that go off to remote places to study. Now these are the warrior monks where they dedicate themselves to sword play and battle tactics and whatnot. And so this is cool. I didn't realize that this was the thing.
I mean, in a culture that's centered around warfare, you're allowed to have warrior monks. So here's our sword master Ardent.
And interesting about Zael too, how it's Kaladin notices that he doesn't have the the shaved head that
Yep.
Ardents usually have.
Yep.
Like male or female, they usually have a shaved head, and Zael does not. And Kaladin kind of wonders why. And we didn't really get an answer, I don't think, in this chapter, but the impression I got was that he basically is he's so awesome and has such a reputation that like he gets to do what he wants, kind of thing. You know, he's so powerful and well known that no one's going to go tell him, you know, hey man, you got to shave your head, kind of thing, and
Right.
he can grow his hair out if he wants to.
Yeah, the impression I get from him is he's like he doesn't want to, and nobody's going to stop him.
Right.
Like, who are you to tell me to shave my head? That's stupid. I'm not going to. Kaladin and Adolin have a run-in this chapter. Do we want to talk about this little duel that they have?
That's what I was actually kind of excited to talk about. I thought it was really cool just to kind of like see them interact in general. We haven't had a whole lot. We've had some dialogue, but for the most part, not much. It was really cool to kind of see them face off a little bit, and we kind of get an insight almost to what Kaladin thinks when he's fighting a shard bear, which I also thought was interesting. Yeah, I'm curious to hear Elliot's thoughts on it in general before moving on, but later it was kind of a big deal, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't have too many thoughts on this. I mean, this seems to be the culmination of some conflict that's been brewing for a little while now between Kaladin and Adolin. They don't seem to get along very well. They just kind of rile each other for different reasons. You know, Kaladin sees Adolin as another example of a spoiled light eyes who's had everything in life handed to him and doesn't know how to earn anything. And Adolin sees Kaladin as that, you know, dark eyes who ordered him around on the battlefield and showed him up in front of his soldiers. And so he's got that, you know, they kind of both have a chip on their shoulders towards each other. And finally it snaps. And I forget exactly how it starts, but Adolin kind of, you know, heckles Kaladin, and Kaladin just charges him, which you got to think like, how stupid can you be, man? He's standing there in shard plate with a shard blade, and you're gonna just pick your spear up and charge at him. But that's classic Kaladin, right? He just kind of does that kind of stuff. He's not afraid to just jump in and take on the challenge. The bigger, the better.
Right.
For sure. And he definitely like I think it's kind of interesting because Kaladin's job is like to protect his father and
Yep.
he just like doesn't care at all about Adolin at all. Not really at least. Um I thought it was really interesting kind of moving on from there that while they're fighting Kaladin sucks in some Stormlight and then it kind of just like vanishes and he like loses his strength while he's charging at him. And I was curious to hear what y'all think about that. Syl mentions, at least it's noted that he wasn't trying to protect anyone, and
Right.
so are there limits to his surge binding that he can like only use it for good? I guess, or maybe that wasn't onerous of him. So since it was an honor sprint, she kind of took his powers away. You know, you're grounded. So
Right.
Yeah.
um So I was a little curious about that. I don't know entirely what to make of that. If it's super serious or what.
Yeah, that seemed like a little revelation there that Syl at least seems to be somewhat in control of his powers and has it seems like she has an off switch for his powers, which is interesting. We always knew that Syl was intricately part of the powers that Kaladin has, but apparently she can just decide, nope, I'm going to take those now. you're grounded. Sorry, you were not using them responsibly, so now you're gonna sit there and think about what you've done, kind of thing.
Right. There's when he got his powers, he said the first ideal, which is uh life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination. But then when he actually started manifesting his powers is when he said it the second ideal at the end of the Way of Kings, which is I will protect. And he's not protecting anyone here. He's just going after Adolin because he's riled up and hot tempered, and win, lose, or draw, he's going to give his all and gonna go kick Adolin in the chest or whatever he's trying to do. And Syl's like, excuse me? What are we doing here, kids?
Yeah.
Yep, pretty much. And Kaladin, the scene is interesting too because Kaladin's trying to be careful in not revealing his abilities to those around him. He's trying. He uses Stormlight, like in this instance, to give him some increased strength and speed in order to fight Adolin. And then when Adolin does eventually send him flying across the arena, smashing into a wall that would seriously injure us, I think even Zael is quite worried at first about Kaladin, figuring he's going to have a bunch of broken bones, and he stands up and shakes it off, and he's fine because he had the Stormlight to heal him. I think Kaladin's going to have to be a little careful because while yes, he didn't use enough to like glow and maybe obviously show that he's using Stormlight, I think if he keeps doing this, if he keeps performing what people are going to begin to realize are superhuman feats, people are going to start putting the puzzle pieces together and realize that, yeah, there's something about you that's not normal. You
Right.
can only get thrown against a wall so many times before someone says, hey, you're not breaking. Something's up here.
It's in contrast, just a couple pages previous, of Renarin jumping off and being fine because of shard plate, and then
Right.
Kaladin isn't breaking him by getting tossed against a wall by a shard bearer. And yeah, so you're right. If he keeps using his Stormlight to heal himself and rely on that, then people are going to start asking questions.
Exactly.
Also, to note is I'll just highlight that I'll bring Zeth back into this picture. That our only known Surge Binder widespread right now is Zeth. So, and I've brought that up before, but just keep that in mind that Dalinar might be interested if Kaladin's Surge Binding, but other people might not be so thrilled if they find out.
Zeth is always on my mind, but yes, thank you.
You're welcome. It's been a while, so I just wanted to bring him back up and remind everyone that he's still here.
Very fair. Yeah, we didn't get him in the interludes, so
we did not get him in the interludes. Alrighty. Do you guys want to talk about Shallan?
Let's do it.
Yes.
All right. So backing up to chapter 17, and we'll tie, I guess, the rest of this episode together kind of right here. She's on the way to the Shattered Plains with Tvlakov, and they see smoke in the distance. And Tvlakov thinks, well, they won't really chase us because they can see that we're not that big of a threat. We don't have that much. But the smoke and the bandits that are following them do end up tracking them. And they get closer and closer until Tvlakov's convoy, Tvlakov's 3 wagons, sees smoke in front of them too. And so they're like, well, what do? We don't really have a choice here. I guess we have to keep going forward and hope the smoke in front of us is friendly, because they know the smoke behind them is not friendly. So they push forward and they find another caravan. Someone wanna pick up here.
Yeah, I'll pick up there, but I'll take it back a little bit.
Sure.
Before we get to the caravan that they meet, the merchants that they come across, at first they're just traveling along, and we meet a new character. I forget if he's been mentioned before, but I think he has. Bluth
Hmm.
is how I would pronounce that name. The one of Tavlakov's men, and he seems a rather, you know, unsavory character. You know, nothing too likable about this guy, but Shallan draws him as the first person she's adding back to her collection that she's lost.
Yeah.
Because before, remember, she had this massive collection of drawings of all these people that she'd met. You know, one of the very first things we saw her do was draw a picture of Yalb, the sailor
Pirate.
guy who was with her in the beginning of Way of Kings, and how that was a meaningful addition to her collection. Well, she lost all of that when the ship sank, when she sank the ship by soul casting it. So now she has to start all over, and this is the first guy that she starts with. But it seems very symbolic that she's taking a rather unsavory character and she draws him in such a way that he's depicted as a hero. He's depicted as someone, a soldier's uniform with, you know, the sun in a, you know, epic lighting, or whatever it's described as in her picture. And even though he's not really that person, she sees that in him, and so she draws him that way. And that has kind of interesting implications for where Bluth ends up here by the end of this episode that we'll talk about in a little bit. But an interesting and rather symbolic way, I felt, to restart her collection of sketches.
Right. It's doesn't Pattern have a comment about it that the sketch she's doing isn't 100% true, and he likes that about it, that
Yeah.
the sketch is almost a lie, that Bluth isn't actually that soldier, but Shallan's like, no, this is how I wanted to draw him.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I I don't know how I got this image. Maybe it's because of that actually. I'm whenever listening to this, I always thought of Bluth just as a hero. Kind of not super important, but maybe it's because of that, like she depicted him very well. But in reality he was not the best guy, you know.
Right.
He's not like a Dalinar Cullen, obviously. Uh but I always thought of him, I guess, in a positive light. I don't fully know why, but maybe that's why. Maybe her drawing stuff worked on me. Who knows?
It does have interesting implications for later, because she uses kind of something similar on the bandits, or on the deserters
Mercenaries.
that
Yes.
that catch up to them. And she gives them this speech, and we're kind of jumping ahead here, but I'll go ahead with it. She gives them this speech imagining that they're the soldiers that they once were, not that the deserters that she knows they are. So she's trying to appeal to their honor as soldiers that she knows they had at one point, and it works. All these soldiers are like, yeah, there's people in trouble, we'll go defend them. That's what soldiers do. That's what we used to do. I want to do that. And most of the soldiers, besides maybe Vatha, who just goes along with it because that's what everybody else is doing, they're persuaded by that, of this is who you could be, this is who I know you were, act like it.
I'll go ahead and read a section actually from exactly that scene, because I think this is really pivotal in what happens in chapter. We're jumping ahead to chapter 20 now, where we get the scene where Shallan goes back towards the deserters, and then convinces them. Once she's kind of given her initial speech, I think this ends up being Vatha, but a man steps forward out of the mercenaries and says, "Brightness, we aren't what you think we are." "No," Shallan replied, "you aren't what you think yourselves to be." And that's really interesting to me, and really plays into the greater theme here, I felt, of Shallan Shallan is changing these people, or she's awakening something in these people that's maybe hidden behind who they think they are, or she's digging through the mud to find the gem, just like with Bluth. She looks at the guy he's a slaver basically, but she depicts him as a hero, and ultimately he kind of ends up being a hero. I mean, he dies a very honorable death, if you will, in trying to save the merchants that they meet up with here pretty soon. But with these men, she's doing the same thing, like you're saying, Trevor. She's telling them, be who you used to be, find that soldier within. But this is where I'm caught. This is where I'm caught in my charisma versus deception. Is this Shallan inspiring these men to awaken and aspire to something greater than they are? Or is she really just kind of manipulating them into doing what she needs them to do in the moment?
Right.
She's using her illumination to do this. She's putting on an image that's not her in the moment. She's putting on this, regal depiction of hers. It describes it as like she's working in sounds into this as well. There's a scene where like when she emphasizes, oh, the innocent people are getting murdered, like the sound of that starts to wash over all of them. And so is that manipulation and deception? Well, like kind of,
Right.
maybe. I'm on the fence here.
Manipulating them to do something honorable.
Right.
Paul?
And I feel like this is a great like comparison to Pattern and Shallan as well. Like Pattern loves truths and lies, and lies are good and lies are bad. And it's like, well, sort of.
Right.
Okay, so I do want to chime in on this because I kind of like these ethical questions about Shallan. Like, is what she's doing good or bad or what? Um, so she obviously did a great job with the persuasion of the deserters, like very effective. She kind of inspired everyone except his name escapes me, but the main one who was
Vata.
staunchly against her. Yeah. He didn't want to, that's fine, but everyone else went, so it was a big win. And I think it's actually both like persuasion and manipulation because I think of manipulation at least of like getting people to do things for your personal gain in a sense. Usually in like a bad way, like where you gain from them like their detriment almost. And persuasion is like could be like it could be a win-win even, things like that. And so it kind of is because she's persuading them to be honorable, which is awesome. But I wonder if it comes from the wanting to do right or the wanting to get to the Shattered Plains and get out of this mess that she's in, which is understandable for sure. But yeah, I think it's overall good, but she's still on thin ice,
Right.
My former biggest villain of The Way of Kings.
I was gonna bring that up.
Still on thin ice. Yeah.
Do you still think Shallan is the villain?
Not the villain.
Uh-huh.
Definitely not the villain. But her motives are still like wishy-washy, I'm not sold on her motives, even though I actually really like Shallan now. We even did like a poll in our Discord, and it wasn't a poll, but a thing, and I said that I chose Shallan over Kaladin, which is a big step, but yeah.
I like, Paul, how you said I think you said this, she's on thin ice, I think, where she's at right now. She's wielding now what's turning out to be an impressive power. Much like something like a shard blade. A shard blade is incredibly powerful, but you can choose to use it for good or for devastating evil. And Shallan, I think, is going to have to be a little bit careful with this newfound power that she has. If she's able to influence people like this to get them to do what she wants, in this instance, she does help them to make a very honorable decision and really kind of redeem themselves in a way. But she could very easily find herself used for not so honorable ends. I'm real curious to see if that's going to become a temptation for her as we go forward.
Right. More deception and less motivation type thing.
Exactly. So jumping back to 17, chapter 17, to hit a thought I had there, we learn more about Spren, which I'm always quick to key into anytime we get some more nuggets of information about Spren. And Pattern is able to share with us some good info. There was a whole page of really good info actually in this chapter. And the interesting bit though that dropped in this chapter that caught my eye was Pattern thinks that Shallan is going to kill him. And Shallan, just like me, is a little shocked by this. Like, what? I'm not going to kill you, Pattern. And he kind of drops this hint, or is at least making me think that did the Radiance of old, the Knights Radiant that threw down their swords and their armor and forsook the way of the Knights Radiant, did they by doing that kill their Spren? Is that what happened? Is that what Pattern knows of and is afraid is going to happen to him?
Is that a question or a prediction?
I don't know yet.
Paul?
I think it is. Well, obviously, it has to be tied to the Knights Radiant, unless it's something else much bigger that we don't really know about yet. I would say it has to be tied to the Knights Radiant because, as far as we know, that's the last time that humans and Spren were like a thing. They were like, involved in each other's lives, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so it definitely has to be that. I don't know if specifically like when was it the Day of Reckoning, whenever they all threw down their shard blades and quit. I don't know if that's what killed the Spren. I'm not entirely sure. Or if it was kind of almost like it could almost be like a neglect thing. Like they just they refuse to use their powers and maybe somehow the Spren kind of dies off in a sense. I don't know if that's possible. Maybe. But it definitely has to be tied to that. I don't know how.
Yeah, I'm definitely in maybe territory on this too. I don't know if I have enough here to make any kind of prediction, but I'm kind of in, what if mode of, what if on that day the knights, somehow broke their bond with the Spren. And in this chapter, Pattern talks about how Spren they need a human to give them life. I think the word he uses is sapience, which is a good word. It's he's a thought, right? And he needs a human to give him life or like existence, kind of, sort of, at least in the physical realm, right? And so when the knights laid down their swords and walked away, did they somehow like break that bond, therefore we're taking away that life from their Spren? And I think we've had mentioned before about the Spren feel betrayed from the past. Just vague hints about that. We don't have any specifics, but the Spren somehow they think there was some sort of betrayal. Maybe that was it. Maybe they were kind of cast back into this, not non-existence, but lesser existence, or existence with only thought and no life, and they view that as being killed, and that's what Pattern thinks is going to happen to him. Not answers, but wonderings.
The one that I'm pretty convinced of at the moment is, so effectively with humans giving life to Spren. So whenever we first met Syl, she was very simple-minded. She kind of knew her name, and she was that was it. And she kind of, she's developed more and more, and now she seems fully online. I don't know, fully functioning,
Right.
really animated and stuff. And Pattern is kind of being the same way. At first, he just kind of buzzed, and now he'll he's starting to talk more and more. It's making more sense each time. I expect to see a similar growth there, and I guess with it's almost like when the Spren joins with a human, they're kind of like born into the physical world, and so it takes a while for them to like learn how to communicate and like all that stuff, obviously. And so I definitely think that's like pretty legitimate. Like I think just about any Spren, I guess, could do that, and like develop into a soul, just about. But it just like takes that time.
So something that I've kind of want to it's kind of a tangent on this, but you guys do have enough information. I won't be presenting any new information here, but I will be ironing out something. So if you guys remember way back in The Way of Kings, we had an interlude. And Paul, you said it was the least interesting interlude. We had our two old Ardents, and they were talking about flame spren. And one of the Ardents measures this spren with a ruler and says it's 3¼ inches or something. And the spren freezes. It's now 3¼ inches, as opposed to being a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger, just being a spren. And then Shallan on the ship, when she finally sees pattern and takes a memory and then writes on the page, this is like what she sees, pattern becomes that pattern on the page. That is now pattern. And Spren are from the cognitive realm and have to do with human thought. So Spren are kind of defined as what the human perceives them as. So the human thinks, okay, this spren is 3¼ inches tall. That spren is literally now 3¼ inches tall, and it will not change because the human has thought about it that way, and they're from because the spren's from the cognitive realm. That's like life to them. Pattern is kind of this moving pattern based on this drawing that Shallan wrote, because that's how Shallan thinks of him. Sill's a little bit different, but you kind of understand what I'm trying to get at here, is that because they're from the cognitive realm, they kind of feed off of these human impressions of them.
Yeah, so Spren are really whatever we want them to be.
Right,
Or
exactly.
whatever you want them to be. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, all that makes sense. It's starting to help me get an understanding of what Spren are, but I feel like there's still more unknowns than there are knowns. But we're starting to piece together a bit of a picture of what Spren really are.
And if a spren has been seen as a stick its entire life, it's gonna maintain being a stick its entire life. So it's a stick.
I'm a stick. I was gonna say, actually, that reminds me. I'm actually glad you said that. In our chapter that we talked about persuading the deserters, it seems that Shallan is, or I guess I don't know what you'd call it, the trueness to self of the stick is stronger than it was with those deserters. They were very easily,
That's
in
true.
comparison, very easily persuaded, but the stick would not budge. Shallan could not best the stick with her persuasion. Very cool.
It's funny you mentioned that, Paul, because I had a note on it, but now I think I wrote down the wrong page number. But there's a moment too in, I think it's chapter 20, where it's got to be Shallan and Pattern talking, but I don't honestly remember who. But they're talking about, you changed them, and Shallan's like, well, I didn't soul cast anything. It's like, well, you still changed them, and in kind of a similar way as when she soul casts, when she goes to Shadesmar and has an argument with a stick to try and persuade it. In a similar way, she persuaded the deserters to become heroes or soldiers, or however you want to look at it. And so while it's not like metaphysical change, it is in a way a change of some sort.
Any other Spren thoughts before we get a Shallan flashback chapter?
One more Spren thought, or Sprenish thought, because it's in the same conversation as the one we were just talking about with the Knights Radiant and Pattern getting killed. In that same conversation, Shallan kind of ends it with, well, I would never do that because I'm not a Knights Radiant. And Pattern kind of responds with, you said the oath. And then she remembers. Shallan, for a brief second, remembers and starts to think the first lines of the first ideal. I, again, lost my page number, but she starts to think the life before death as if she's remembering again something from her kind of suppressed memories. So is there some point in her past where she's already said the first ideal that we saw Kaladin say when he first used, or kind of around the time when he first used his ability? It seems like Shallan's already had that moment, when actually I was waiting for that moment to come when she would say that. But this seems to hint that that's already come and gone, which is interesting.
I don't actually remember that, but that's actually really cool. I do have another thought, about Spren. My biggest thought now, with Trevor, with your comparison with the Spren and the old interlude, if I say the Spren is 4 inches long, that Spren is literally 4 inches long.
Right.
If you think of it that way. And I'm wondering about Syl now. I think you said specifically not to worry about Syl, but I'm worried about Syl. So, I think that Syl is like that. Maybe the Spren. I've said this before, that the Spren might be like who that person needs, if that makes sense. Sylphrena has a great contrast to Kaladin, who's very like down in the dirt on himself often.
Sure.
And Syl is more upbeat, like it's all good. Like, let me cheer you up in general. Don't fully know the comparison between Shallan and Pattern, if there is one. If so, then I would say it's about truths and lies, obviously, and how like events in her past have kind of shaped her or affected her, and kind of using that rather than running from it in a way. And I think Syl may be Syl, like the way she is, the way she appears to Kaladin, because of just like an unconscious, like what Kaladin kind of needed, I guess, like what Kaladin needed in his life.
Right.
That's probably like how she appeared to him. And with Shallan, I don't fully know that. She's such like an analytical mind and a thinker that Pattern seems to be way more like cut and dry. But I think Syl, for Kaladin, I don't know, he kind of needed this whimsical little sprite, Yeah. And so that's my guess. But I kind of like how it feels like we have more rules for Spren at the moment. Like a little more. It's like, instead of being a room of, I don't know, loose thoughts, and now it's like a box, kind of. I feel like we're starting to narrow Spren down a little bit. So I'm really happy about that. But that is my only other thought about that.
I like it. Makes sense.
And then right when you think you know what's going on. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, I know everything. Don't worry. Don't worry.
We do get a Shallan flashback chapter. We want to talk about Shallan's family issues.
I think that'll be all. All right. See y'all next week. I'm kidding. No, I actually loved this chapter. If I can't go ahead and hop into it a little bit, the reason I liked this chapter specifically, as far as I remember, the only other Shallan flashback we've had was chapter 10, which was kind of just a dark scene followed by a fairly creepy lullaby. Um, it it was just questions. There weren't we there may have been one answer, and we kind of know we get a glimpse of the traumatic event that we assumed happened in Shallan's past. Um, but this chapter, we actually get to learn some more from conversations and seeing things, and I was really excited for it. I was very excited listening to this chapter. Um, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Elliot. I don't know how deep you dove into it or what. Um, but yeah.
I like this chapter quite a bit. I do think there's a lot here actually that may help us out. There's a few different things that we learn here that aren't maybe obvious at first, but as I was reading it through the second time, I kind of was realizing, ooh, this could have implications. And I think the first, honestly, is we meet another one of Shallan's brothers. His name is Non Helleran.
Yeah,
Helleran?
Non is a title. It means eldest. And Helleran is his name.
Helleran. Okay. And that's exactly where I was going with it too, because I remembered that Non is the title, meaning eldest. But we know from previous other events we've seen that Non Balat is Shallan's current eldest brother. Well,
Correct.
if she had a previously eldest brother, clearly this guy is going to die at some point. And so that Balat then becomes the eldest brother after Helleran dies. So that's interesting to learn right there. The second thing that's fascinating here is that at the end of the chapter, Helleran whips out a shard blade. Again, back to my theory on these things are way more popular than we've been led to believe. We were told that these things were super rare, but it seems like everyone and
Literally
their mother
everybody has
so,
one. Yep.
Right? Anyway, Helleran whips out the shard blade and faces down their father, almost takes him down right there. But notice that from everything we've learned about their father, I would think if he had a shard blade, he would draw it in that moment. If his son is bearing down, it's described as he goes white with fear. He thinks his son's going to kill him right there. If he had a shard blade, he would have drawn it, which tells me he doesn't have one. That changes the whole story for me. If Shallan's father doesn't have a shard blade, where did she get hers? And what happened back in that chapter 10 that we saw, if we saw a death of her mother, which we thought was by a shard blade, but if her father doesn't have one, who had the shard blade that did the killing?
I love Paul's reactions. I love them so much. As you're explaining it, Paul's just like, wait.
Yeah, that changes you're right, that changes everything. So I did notice the non-Helleran thing. I did not remember that meant oldest. I definitely remembered non-Balat, but it didn't make that connection, which that is very telling. That's really good because that's such a small detail, but that is very explicitly telling.
Now it's possible that Shallan's father perhaps has a shard blade, but has some really good self-control and doesn't draw it here, perhaps. But that seems unlikely. That seems really unlikely.
True. I could definitely believe him having a shard blade still, but you have a point. He seemed like the guy who would just pull his shard blade out right then, if he's tested at all. So yeah, and that makes me wonder, so I don't remember fully. I know we talked about chapter 10 for a while, and talked about was it the dad who killed them, who killed everyone there? But now it's was it Helleran? Maybe non-Helleran.
Right.
Who
Or does
knows?
Shallan already have the shard blade? Does 11-year-old Shallan have a shard blade? How did that happen?
Yeah. They do talk about it. I don't remember all the specifics, but they talk about that night sun. The reason briefly going back to one of my words broken for this week was mostly for it was a conversation between Halloran and Shallan. So Halloran is about to leave, and Shallan is drawing, and she keeps drawing like that scene and like the dead bodies on the ground. And he's like, "Hey, you need to stop that. That's not a great
Don't do that.
hobby." Um, and it's obvious that Shallan is very traumatized from that. Side note: do y'all know how long this is after that night? Does it say? I don't remember.
It does give you a timestamp. I believe it's 6 months later.
Okay. So yeah, obviously Shallan is very, very like upset, and that memory is just like ingrained into her mind. Um, which really had I gained a lot of sympathy, I guess, for Shallan with that. Um, just thinking, about just a child who's like obviously very troubled by it. Is very sad. Um, but yeah, I always love when
Yeah,
Elliot makes these connections because that's
I'm
very
feeling the Shallan. I'm feeling the Shallan sympathy too, actually, because she's in this scene, but then also in present day Shallan, she's actively suppressing her memories of this. Like she's doing everything she can not to think about what happened, and I can't help but think, is this a simple just defense mechanism of she's so traumatized by it she can't think of it or she doesn't want to think about it, or is maybe something else kind of going on here? Like we we've seen Dalinar. Dalinar has no memories of his wife, his wife who died. Like something magical is happening there where he cannot remember her. He cannot even remember her name, even when people tell it to him.
Right.
And so now I'm getting to the point actually where I'm starting to wonder if there's something maybe magical going on here with Shallan. Did something happen during this traumatic event that's like scarred her memory, like physically scarred it such that the memory's not there, or part of it's not there, or it's distorted somehow? Or is it just as simple she's so traumatized by it she does everything she can not to think about it? I'm not really sure there, but yeah, I'm feeling for Shallan right now, definitely.
It killed her thought spread on the topic, and she can't remember it now.
She's lost her thought spread.
Mm-hmm. If
Is that
I
like losing your train of thought? Is the metaphor in this world losing
lost my
your thought
thoughts,
spread?
friend.
I've
Yeah,
lost my marbles. I've lost my thought spread.
yeah, exactly. If I had to give my guess about that, I actually do think this is just like a more simple thing. I don't think like something happened that like cursed her into like distorting this memory. We don't know what happened there. If she witnessed a murder, we don't know if something happened. If there is some form of magic involved, then I would guess it's something that could have, like, I don't know, possessed her or convinced her to kill people. And that would be why she's scarred. But either way, it's like this memory is just ingrained in her mind. And uh, I think it's just as simple as that. But it could very well be more. Um, but yeah, I was excited because I felt like this chapter gave some answers. Um, not a total side note, but a side note in that conversation with Halloran and Shallan, I also really liked that. Um, he was really encouraging to her, and how he was like, he even references. I guess Balat had his bad habits or bad tendencies back then as well. He talked about that he gave him a pet, and he was not very kind to it, which was very sad.
Yeah.
Uh,
He does seem like the most normal, if you will, of the Devar children. Like he seems like a likable guy. You're right.
he's
He seems
very
like he genuinely wants to help Shallan where she's at. He's trying to be encouraging, and he gives her a sketchbook or whatever he does, or paper or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is.
Charcoal and
he's like the
pencils. Yeah.
best big brother, like
Yeah,
the
totally.
perfect big brother.
Which leads me into what is perhaps an ironically sad theory that I have about Helleran. As if the theories and connections I had from this chapter weren't enough, I've actually got a crazy other theory about Helleran. So Helleran in this chapter, it's a multi-part theory here. Helleran in this chapter is leaving. He's going away for a long time. We get the impression he's not going to be back for a while, and he makes some sort of mention of my newfound friends are doing important things or something like that, and that immediately gets me thinking Ghost Bloods, maybe. We've seen before Shallan's family has some sort of ties with them or some sort of kind of interaction with them. Is he in with them and is now, going off to help them in whatever they're doing, in the grander scale of things? That's step one. Step two, back in Way of Kings, when we see Kaladin kill a Shardbearer, win a Shardblade, Amaram takes it from him. That iconic scene where Amaram betrays him, kills all his men, all of that. There's a brief part of that, and I had to go back and read it, where Amaram is talking with his men about who was this Shardbearer. There weren't supposed to be any Shardbearers at this battle. Who is he and where did he come from? All they conclude is that he's Vaden. I have very little to base this on, but I wonder, and I'd be even willing to hazard a prediction here. I think that Shardbearer was Shallan's brother Helleran.
You think Kaladin killed Shallan's brother?
I think he did.
I really like it. I think
it's
that's not
it's
that
exciting and interesting, and then terrible all at the same time.
Right.
That is very Stormlight archive fashion,
Right.
Like,
so let me get this straight. You think Kaladin killed Shallan's older brother, who everyone's supposed to like, to defend Amaram, who then backstabs Kaladin. All right, just wanted to
exactly. Yeah. And to be fair, I have one small little shard of evidence for this. We get a description of the Shardblade that Helleran draws. The description of that Shardblade is similar to the description of the Shardblade that Kaladin gives as he's seeing the Shardbearer charge him. But it kind of on the flip side of that, the description we get of that is similar to a lot of kind of Shardblades that we've had. They're described as having these like wave-like or like flame-like designs on them. Like I think Oathbringer Dalinar's sword is actually described in a similar way as well. But so it's very, very small. But wouldn't that be crazy if that was the truth?
That would be, because Shallan's on her way to the Shattered Plains, where Kaladin and Amaram are. And we know Kaladin has a lot of beef with Amaram, and so something happens, he pulls out a shard blade, Shallan sees that's Helleran's. What's going on here? Well, I'm assuming she knows that he's not here, but if she saw that, she would be it wouldn't bring up good memories for her. So
that's a good point. As you were just saying that,
it could give some credibility to Kaladin.
Yes.
Ooh,
that would.
Ooh.
That would.
Very interesting. As you were saying that, Paul, my first thought was going to be, well, they'd never know, right? Helleran just kind of went off and was killed. They may never make that connection, but the Shardblade could be that connection if Shallan is able to recognize it. Ooh.
I really want this to be the case.
All right.
A lot of good
Write
stuff,
this one
guys.
down.
A lot of good stuff.
Yeah, I'm going to definitely remember that one. I like it.
All right. Any closing thoughts from this episode? Those are some good theories, guys.
That's it from me, Chief.
Nothing else earth-shattering and predicting or craziness, but Gaz is back. We meet Gaz, who's apparently part of the deserters.
Yep.
That Shallan is able to persuade to save the day. I was not expecting that one.
True.
Elliot,
They're really just bringing
back a long time ago, you thought Gaz was dead because we hadn't heard from Gaz for a while, and we find out now that he deserted with some of his friends, and now he's joined Shallan to get to the Shattered Plains. Who's there? Kaladin. Sadius is there.
Scene,
right?
This reunion scene of Shallan getting to the Shattered Plains is just getting awkwarder and awkwarder the more like we're learning and the groups are building.
Right.
Like now we have Shallan who's gonna meet her betrothed, but Yasna's not with her. They don't know Yasna's not dead yet. She's gonna have to announce that. She's gonna look a mess when they think that she's gonna come in as like a bright lady person, and now Gaz is with them. We're gonna see Pattern and Syl interact. Like, oh man.
Yep. She now has Gaz under her command, and he is a deserter from Sadius's army. Like, wait a minute, what's happening here?
They really just brought back all the people that Kaladin hated with Shallan.
Yep.
It's on entirely different terms, which is kind of funny, for the most part. Yeah. Tvlakov is gone now, I believe, but if she rolled up with Tvlakov and Gaz, that would be one or the other. It's basically trading him off right now, which is about relatively even, but if there were both.
If Tvlakov had come with him, it would have turned into like the biggest Mexican standoff ever.
Yeah.
You.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
So yeah, we're leading up to a very interesting scene. I think is going to come when we eventually get there.
Only one way to get there. It's to read and find
Keep
out,
reading.
as Brandon Sanderson says. So we will call it there and reconvene next week. Thanks for joining me, Paul and Eliot.
See ya.
Toodles.